Hello and welcome to our Bible study session 8, coming to you from outdoors, my backyard, and I hope that it's a nice pleasant background. I know I'm a little bit in the shadow, but that could change. Session 8, Revelation chapters 14, 15, 16, and 17, series of visions that we continue to see. Just to remind you, this whole study is called Apocalyptic and Pandemic, what Revelation is telling us today, and a reminder that that what Revelation offered to the people in that first century was a sense that God is ultimately in charge, and that God's ways would win out, that there would be accountability for all those who were persecuting the church, and all those who were faithful even through death would be rewarded. So Revelation 14, chapters 1 through 5. John is speaking. Then I looked, and there was the Lamb, it's the Lamb that was slain, standing on Mount Zion. With him were 144,000 who had his name and his Father's name written on their foreheads. And I heard a voice from heaven like the sound of many waters and like the sound of thunder. The voice I heard was like the sound of harpists playing on their harps. And they sing a new song before the throne and before the four living creatures and before the elders. No one could learn that song except the 144,000 who have been redeemed from the earth. It is these who have not defiled themselves with women, for they are virgins. These follow the Lamb wherever he goes. They have been redeemed from humankind as first fruits for God and the Lamb, and in their mouth no lie was found. They are blameless. So this section is about the worshipers of the Lamb. John looked and saw the Lamb standing on Mount Zion. We don't know for sure. It's not completely clear if this Mount Zion was heaven or if it was Mount Zion on earth, the new temple or the old temple come back. But the 144,000, remember that representing all of Israel and the church, 12,000 times 12, they were with him, the seal of the Lamb inscribed on their foreheads. They were the martyrs, the redeemed. There was a heavenly voice sounding like the roaring sound of water, like loud thunder, and like a lot of harps playing. Lots of different images for how overpowering it was. And the heavenly voice became many voices singing a new song to God. But only the 144,000 were able to learn and sing the new song because it was a song that expressed their inner nature. They were morally pure, truthful, and with no sexual defilement. And what that referred to was the emperor cult. And sexual action as part of that emperor cult was part of that worship and part of what the Christians decried about it. This group is the first fruits of humanity. In other words, the best of humanity present as an offering to God. Now, Revelation 14, 6 to 13. The text, then I saw another angel flying in mid-heaven with an eternal gospel to proclaim to those who live on the earth, to every nation and tribe and language and people. And that has been a description that tends to refer to those outside the church. He said in a loud voice, "Fear God and give him glory, for the hour of his judgment is come, and worship him who made heaven and earth, the sea and the springs of water." Then another angel, a second, followed, saying, "Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. She has made all nations drink of the wine of the wrath of her fornication." And then another angel, a third, followed them, crying with a loud voice, "Those who worship the beast in its image and receive a mark on their foreheads or on their hands, they will also drink the wine of God's wrath, poured unmixed into the cup of his anger. And they will be tormented with fire and sulfur in the presence of the holy angels and in the presence of the Lamb. And the smoke of their torment goes up forever and ever. There is no rest or night for those who worship the beast in its image, and for anyone who receives the mark of its name. Here is a call for the endurance of the saints, those who keep the commandments of God and hold fast to the faith of Jesus. And I heard a voice from heaven saying, "Write this, blessed are the dead who from now on die in the Lord. Yes, says the Spirit, they will rest from their labors. Their deeds will follow them." So what we have here is the first of three visions of worshipers of the Lamb and worshipers of the beast. These three new angels flew in mid-heaven. We've not seen them before. The first angel had a message for all the nations that the time for judgment had come. The proclamation was that all nations should fear God and give him glory. And the apocalyptic promise was coming true, that ultimately God would judge those and reward the faithful. The second angel spoke of the fall of Babylon, which is an image for Rome, and that it has fallen. To the church, the enemy was defeated. And remember, this was a time when Rome was powerful and persecuted the church toward the end of the first century. So it's, again, that message of Revelation and all apocalyptic literature that the ultimate victory was God's, and it was now being proclaimed as though it were taking place in this moment. And then a third angel proclaimed that those who followed the beast were condemned. They blessed those who follow God. Even through death, they are rewarded. The followers of the beast, the Antichrist, who received the mark of 666 on their bodies, symbolizing those who followed the pathway of the evil empire, which was Rome, the emperor cult, that whole direction. They were finally to be accountable for their sins. And the punishment of God's wrath was symbolized in very graphic terms by fire and sulfur, eternal smoke, no rest for eternity. And verse 12 explained that these warnings and rewards are actually presented for the purpose of calling the saints to endure the persecution, to be faithful in following, faithful in Jesus. And the hope and the expectation, too, is that any who would, from this point on, choose to follow Christ would be saved. Now, Revelation 14, verses 14 to 20. Then I looked, and there was a white cloud. This is after the first three visions. There was a white cloud, and seated on the cloud was one like the Son of Man, with a golden crown on his head and a sharp sickle in his hand. Another angel, the fourth, came out of the temple, calling with a loud voice to the one who sat on the cloud, "Use your sickle and reap, for the hour to reap has come, because the harvest of the earth is fully ripe." So the one who sat on the cloud swung his sickle over the earth, and the earth was reaped. And then another angel came out, the fifth angel, out of the temple in heaven, and he too had a sharp sickle. And then another angel came out from the altar, the angel who had authority over fire, and he called with a loud voice to him who had the sharp sickle, "Use your sharp sickle and gather the clusters of the vine of the earth, for its grapes are ripe." And so the angel swung his sickle over the earth and gathered the vintage of the earth and threw it into a great winepress of the wrath of God. And the winepress was trodden outside the city, and blood flowed from the winepress as high as a horse's bridle for a distance of 200 miles. Oh my goodness, the imagery is so graphic here. So we have the fourth, fifth, and sixth angels making their proclamations. Before the fourth angel appears, we see one like the Son of Man, and that's directly an image from Daniel 7. We've mentioned several times before. And this time he has a golden crown on his head, symbolizing his authority, and a sharp sickle in his hand for the harvest. And the fourth angel announces to this Son of Man that the time for harvest has come, that he should begin the winnowing because the harvest is ready. And the fifth angel, who has his own sickle, gathers grapes of the earth into a winepress. And the grapes are the harvest of wicked humanity. And the sixth angel commands the fifth one to harvest those grapes of wickedness, which are then thrown into what's called the winepress of God's wrath. Blood flowed from the winepress as high as a horse's bridle for a distance of 200 miles. This represents the tragic consequences of the wickedness of the world, and it's symbolically the inverse of what we would call the cup of blessing. And now Revelation chapter 15, verses 1 through 8. And the text says, "Then I saw another portent in heaven, great and amazing, 7 angels with 7 plagues, which are the last, for with them the wrath of God is ended." We've had so many symbols and portents of God's wrath and judgment, and this is the final 7. And I saw what appeared to be a sea of glass mixed with fire, and those who had conquered the beast and its image and the number of its name, standing beside the sea of glass with harps of God in their hands. Maybe this is where we get the image of angels playing harps. And they sing the song of Moses, the servant of God, and the song of the Lamb. Great and amazing are your deeds, Lord God, the Almighty. Just and true are your ways, King of the nations. Lord, who will not fear and glorify your name? For you alone are holy. All nations will come and worship before you, for your judgments have been revealed. And after this, I looked, and the temple of the tent of witness in heaven was opened, and out of the temple came the 7 angels with the 7 plagues, robed in pure bright linen, with golden sashes across their chests. And then one of those 4 living creatures gave the 7 angels 7 golden bowls full of the wrath of God, who lives forever and ever. And the temple was filled with smoke from the glory of God and from his power. And no one could enter the temple until the 7 plagues of the 7 angels were ended. So what we have here is kind of an eliding or an elision of the last, there were 6 angels, and the 7th angel actually becomes the new 7 angels. Instead of the 7th angel appearing and proclaiming like the first 6, there were 7 new angels with 7 plagues. And this is supposed to be the last of these plagues. And it represents an eliding, a putting together, kind of an overlapping of the previous series of portents, or the new series here in chapter 15. As introduction, John saw this new portent in heaven, a series of terrifying signs and calamities, all designed to demonstrate God's anger with the earth, those who persecuted the church. This was God's answer to the martyr's cry back when the 5th seal was opened. Remember that scroll that none could open but the Lamb that was slain? The 5th seal was opened in Revelation 6, beginning with verse 9, and they asked when God's vengeance would come. And they were told to rest and to wait in their white robes now that retribution has come, and they were avenged. And this newest 7 archangels or archangels are now on the scene with the 7 last plagues. God's purpose has almost been accomplished. There's a sea of glass mixed with fire, which is a mixing of images. The glassy sea from back in chapter 4, verse 6, with fire and a red hue, maybe a heavenly Red Sea. Those who had conquered the beast by remaining faithful had crossed that heavenly Red Sea, the new Exodus. Remember the song of Moses and of Miriam after they crossed the Red Sea? It was sung back in Exodus chapter 15, verses 1 to 18, Miriam's song and Moses. This was combined with a song in praise of the Lamb, which was in the text. And then you have an image of the tent of witness. That's a Greek translation of Exodus chapter 40. Like the tent of meeting, called the tent of witness. This represented the new Exodus of the new Israel. The inner sanctum of the tent opened, and from heaven the 7 angels in bright linen robes and gold sashes appeared, and they had 7 plagues. One of the 4 living creatures gives the 7 angels 7 golden bowls full of God's wrath, and the temple promptly filled with the smoke of God's presence, a normal image of God's majesty and presence. And from this time on, the 7 plagues were completed. Until they were completed, no one was allowed in the temple. And now we're into chapter 16. John says, "Then I heard a loud voice from the temple telling the 7 angels, 'Go and pour out on the earth the 7 bowls of the wrath of God.' And so the first angel went and poured his bowl on the earth, and a foul and painful sore came on those who had the mark of the beast and who had worshipped its image. And the second angel then poured his bowl into the sea. It became like the blood of a corpse, and every living thing in the sea died. And the third angel poured his bowl into the rivers and the springs of water, and they became blood. And I heard the angel of the waters say, 'You are just, O Holy One, who are and were, for you have judged these things, because they shed the blood of the saints and prophets. You have given them blood to drink. It's what they deserve.' And I heard the altar respond, 'Yes, O Lord,'" remember the martyrs in the altar, "'Yes, O Lord God, the Almighty, your judgments are true and just.'" So here we have the first 3 angels and their bowls of plagues. Instructions were given to the angels to pour out the wrath of God on the earth. And the image of bowls were used in the worship of Israel to hold and pour blood for offerings. The first angel poured out the first bowl, which brings a plague of ulcers, skin ulcers, from drinking the wine of God's wrath. And there is certainly some reference to the plague of boils in Egypt in the Exodus, or before the Exodus. The second angel then poured out his bowl into the sea, which turned to blood. It became the blood of a corpse. And can't tell you exactly what that means, the blood of a corpse. I don't know if that's any worse or better than the blood of a body that's living and dying. But every living thing in the sea died. Of course, this also is a reference to the plague in Egypt, chapter 7, 14 to 25, when the Nile was turned to blood. And the third angel poured his bowl in the rivers and springs, the tributaries, and they turned to blood. And the imagery is that the earth and all those responsible for persecuting the saints must drink the blood of the martyrs. Again, this refers to the Egyptian plagues, Exodus 7, verse 19, as well as the Exodus story of Israel encountering non-potable water on the Exodus in the wilderness, and Moses changing it into drinking water. In response, the heavenly voices are justifying God's retribution, basically saying that, yeah, you're right to do this, God. It's hard, but it's the right thing. Continuing in chapter 16, verses 8 through 16, the text says, the fourth angel poured his bowl on the sun, and it was allowed to scorch them with fire. But they were scorched by the fierce heat. But they cursed the name of God, who had authority over these plagues, and they did not repent, the nations, and give him glory. And so the fifth angel poured his bowl on the throne of the beast, and its kingdom was plunged into darkness. People gnawed their tongues in agony and cursed the God of heaven because of their pain and sore, and they did not repent of their deeds. And the sixth angel poured his bowl on the great river Euphrates, and its water was dried up in order to prepare the way for the kings from the east. And I saw 3 foul spirits like frogs coming from the mouth of the dragon, from the mouth of the beast, and from the mouth of the false prophet. These are demonic spirits, performing signs, who go abroad to the kings of the whole world to assemble them for battle on the great day of God the Almighty. See, I'm coming like a thief. Blessed is the one who stays awake and is clothed, not going about naked and exposed to shame. And they assembled them at the place that in Hebrew is called Armageddon. So now we have the fourth, fifth, and sixth angels and their bowls of plagues. And the fourth angel poured out his bowl on the sun and scorched people with the intense heat. Poured it right on the sun, and I guess the heat and the hot steam from the sun scorched people. And in response, people cursed God. They did not repent, and their suffering continued. In the epistle, 2 Peter 3, verse 10, all the elements themselves were destroyed by fire. This is something of that sort. They were all burned up. And in the book, the Apocalypse of Peter, creation itself was destroyed by a flood of fire. And in that case, people were scorched, but not consumed or destroyed. And in response to the pain, people cursed and blasphemed God. The fifth angel's bowl poured out in darkness on the beast's kingdom, and the angel poured the bowl out on the throne of the beast in the bottomless pit. And this is a reference, of course, to the Egyptian plague of darkness combined with pain from the scorching. Just as many horrible things as you can imagine. The judgment of God is a terrible thing. And the sixth angel's bowls poured on the Euphrates River and dried it up. Remember, the Euphrates was one of the rivers that ran through the Garden of Eden in the first few chapters of Genesis. This plague combines the second Egyptian plague, Exodus chapter 8, verses 1 to 15, with Revelation chapter 9, verses 13 to 19. And remember those 4 angels who were bound at the Euphrates and were released? Demonic spirits like frogs assembled the kings of the east for Armageddon, the final battle, and things are beginning to take shape for that. This stands in contrast with the wise men from the east in Matthew's gospel, who came out of a sense of unity to worship the King of God. Verse 15 is reminiscent of Jesus' parable of the foolish virgins, the bridesmaids, as they were supposed to keep awake. And the final battle was prepared at Har Megiddon, which literally means the plain near the mountains of Megiddo. And the plain at Megiddo was the site of many significant ancient battles and would become the symbolic site of the cosmic battle of good and evil, which we call Armageddon. All right, finish up chapter 16 now, verses 17 to 21. The seventh angel poured his bowl into the air, and a loud voice came out of the temple from the throne saying, "It is done." And there came flashes of lightning, rumbles of peals of thunder, and a violent earthquake such as not occurred since people were upon the earth. So violent was that earthquake. The great city was split into 3 parts, and the cities of the nations fell. And God remembered great Babylon and gave her the wine cup of the fury of his wrath. And every island fled away, and no mountains were to be found, and huge hailstones, each weighing about 100 pounds, dropped from heaven on people, until they cursed God for the plague of the hail. So fearful was that plague. So the seventh angel's bowl of wrath. The seventh angel emptied his bowl into the air, just tossed it in the air, when a loud voice sounded from the temple, and the voice said, "It is done." And this, of course, refers and reminds us of the last words of Jesus when he said, "It is finished. It is accomplished." The impending destruction of Babylon, which is Rome, which was prophesied in Revelation 14:8, had reached its culmination. And essentially, God proclaimed, "It is done," and that proclamation was confirmed with the usual lightning, thunder, earthquakes that symbolize God's judgment, God's majesty, God's wrath. And there were parallels to earlier triumphant and visions of trumpets and all of that we have. So a lot of these images are recycled, used again. This horrible earthquake divided Babylon, Rome, into 3 parts. Remember early on when some of those early plagues were happening, 1/3 of the earth or 1/3 of the seas were destroyed. The islands fled, the mountains were destroyed, which refers back to chapter 6 in Revelation. But remember, these had already been destroyed. And it's a sign that these signs are symbols of God's promised accountability. They're not meant to be literal destructions that happen in this world, I don't think. But they're meant to symbolize that God's wrath and anger is a fearsome thing. And this represents different expressions of the same action, the same retribution. The plague of giant killing hail, it says 100 pounds, or originally it was said 1 talent, was the preparation now for the end of all things. And now we're into Revelation 17, chapter 17, verses 1 through the first part of verse 6. Then one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls came and said to me, "Come, I will show you the judgment of the great whore who is seated on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication, and the wine of whose fornication the inhabitants of the earth have become drunk." And so he carried me away in the spirit into a wilderness. I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast that was full of blasphemous names, and it had 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was clothed in purple and scarlet and adorned with gold and jewels and pearls, holding in her hand a golden cup full of abominations and the impurities of her fornication. And on her forehead was written a name, a mystery, Babylon the Great, mother of whores and of earth's abominations. And I saw that the woman was drunk with the blood of the saints and the blood of the witnesses to Jesus. These are graphic images, certainly in our time and understanding. So here we have this, beginning of the 7 visions of the fall of Babylon, which is Rome. Again, the symbolism of the number 7 refers to this being a God thing, God's presence. One of the 7 angels with the bowls of God's wrath, the 7 who had poured them out, one of them acted as John's guide. And this idea of angels in Revelation and other apocalyptic writings were fairly typically used to serve as guides of humans through the events and the visions. In the first vision, the judgment of the harlot, Babylon the Great, or Rome, from Revelation chapter 17, is pictured as a woman sitting on a scarlet beast with 7 heads and 10 horns. She was clearly a harlot, and the Old Testament references come from books of Nahum, chapter 3, verses 1 to 4, toward Nineveh, Isaiah, chapter 23, verse 15, toward Tyre, Isaiah 1:21, Ezekiel 16, verse 15, when Israel was called a harlot for her idolatry. The image of a harlot was used in contrast to the bride of Christ. She was drunk with the blood of the saints because she is held responsible for all the killings of God's people. And this was a vision of the judgment of Rome characterized by the emperor cult. Rome had seduced the world into following the beast, and that beast could be Satan or evil itself, or maybe the Antichrist. And John was carried by the Spirit into a wilderness of this vision, which of course refers to, remember, Jesus being carried into or driven by the Spirit into the wilderness in Matthew, Mark, and Luke following his baptism. And then John, saw the woman in purple on a scarlet beast full of blasphemous names. This was the same type of beast as in Daniel, and also we've seen this beast in Revelation before, like in chapter 13. This time there were no crowns, no diadems on its head. The color purple, not mentioned previously, meant that the woman was royalty, but also scarlet symbolized both royalty and sin. And this symbolized the rich image of opulence and immorality in high places, and was a warning to Christians not to be seduced by the Roman emperor cult. The beast with blasphemous names from chapter 13, remember the names on its heads, the source of evil for those who cooperated with it. And people, the message here, people will be held accountable for their sin. And now we continue in chapter 17 of Revelation, the second part of verse 6 through 18. The text says, "When I saw her," this woman, "in purple, I was greatly amazed. But the angel said to me, 'Why are you so amazed? I will tell you the mystery of the woman and of the beast with 7 heads and 10 horns that carries her. The beast that you saw was and is not and is about to ascend from the bottomless pit and go to destruction. And the inhabitants of the earth, whose names have not been written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, will be amazed when they see the beast, because it was and is not and is to come.' This calls for a mind that has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman is seated. Also they are 7 kings, of whom 5 have fallen, 1 is living, and the other has not yet come. And when he comes, he must remain only a little while. As for the beast that was and is not, it is an 8th, but it belongs to the 7, and it goes to destruction. And the 10 horns that you saw are 10 kings who have not yet received a kingdom, but they are to receive authority as kings for 1 hour, together with the beast. These are united in yielding their power and authority to the beast. They will make war on the Lamb, and the Lamb will conquer them, for he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and those with him are called and chosen and faithful. And he said to me, 'The waters that you saw, where the whore is seated, are peoples and multitudes and nations and languages. And the 10 horns you saw, they and the beast will hate the whore. They will make her desolate and naked. They will devour her flesh and burn her up with fire. For God has put it into their hearts to carry out his purpose by agreeing to give their kingdom to the beast, until the words of God will be fulfilled. The woman you saw is the great city that rules over the kings of the earth.'" I don't know about you, but that is so confusing. So we have here the second vision, and it's the interpretation of the harlot and the beast with 7 heads and 10 horns. And we've seen, of course, this beast, this image of a beast before. It's a recycled symbol, but this time it means something different than it has previously. Here it represents the kings of Rome, since the color purple denotes royalty. She was the personification of Rome, who is pictured as the harlot of Satan. The gold and jewels were filled with the abominations of God. So you have beautiful, costly vessels filled with abominations. Babylon the Great, the mother of whores, drunk with the blood of the saints. we're reminded that evil power can be intoxicating. And all the anger of those persecuted by Rome was wrapped up in the image of the hatred of Rome. The 7 heads of the beast represent the 7 hills of Rome on which she sat, and also 7 emperors, including Nero. The 10 horns from Daniel chapter 7, verse 24, probably represent 10 kings, but it's not clear which kings. One scenario is that Nero would return from the east with the Parthian troops, and the 10 horns were the Parthian leaders who were allies of Nero, part of the army assembling against the Lamb and his saints in the battle of Armageddon. The Lamb was now King of Kings and Lord of Lords and will defeat those kings. And so now things are coming up close for that great and cosmic battle of Armageddon. Thank you so much. God bless, and I'll see you next time.